Hello everybody, welcome to our next video in our How to Win Arkham Horror the Card Game series. Today we're going to be talking about value and what value is and how you can get as much value as possible from the actions you take in this game. So, Travis is going to lead a lot of this discussion. He composed all these slides and he did a fantastic, well not he gave me the information for the slides and I put them all together, but it's going to be a fun time. Buckle up, get some hot cocoa, and get ready to have three nerds talk to you about Arkham Horror the card game. So, we're going to start with a very simple question. What is value?
Well, value is using one of your resources to, when we talk about resources in this video, by the way, we don't necessarily mean like resource tokens. We'll be mostly referring to that as money and resources as like things in general. Mm-hmm. The value is using one of your resources to get a greater amount of a different resource or a different resource that is more relevant.
Yeah, so as well, to get value, we need to understand what the resources are in Arkham Horror. So there's actions. You get 3 actions a turn base. There's cards. You start with a hand of 5 cards most commonly. Resources, which is used to buy cards and other effects. And as Travis said, we're going to probably refer to them as money from here on out in the game. Experience is how you upgrade your decks. And tempo is kind of this weird ubiquitous timing thing that we have already released a video on, so if you want to hear us talk about tempo in detail, it should be in the link below. I'll put it in the description of the video. So if you're new and you want to understand what we mean by tempo, we have a whole video on it.
Yeah. It doesn't come up too much. You can probably watch this video without understanding it, but you should watch the tempo video too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's get into a very important question, which is how we kind of are going to, before we get into the cards and the examples, we're going to kind of just set a baseline. So these numbers, as we will get to later, this is a lot of just kind of like face value math. These things will change, and when we get at the end of this discussion, we'll talk about some examples that they would change and why the numbers we're about to give you aren't like set in stone. They're just rough examples of the worth of these things. So, Travis, I'll let you talk about these things coming up, which is how much is an action versus a card versus a resource worth?
Yeah, so I took the 3 sort of purest examples that I could find to, or just off the top of my head really, that exemplify this. The first one is emergency cash, which costs the card that it is, and an action to play and generates 3 resources for you. So 1 card in action equals 3 resources. We have swift reflexes, which is 2 money, and it doesn't cost you an action to play because it's fast, and then it costs you, again, the card that it is, and it gives you just an action to do whatever you want with. And finally, we have shortcut, which doesn't cost you any money, and it costs you just the card, and then it gives you an action, albeit a conditional one. So the math behind this is a card in action is worth 3 resources, 1 card and 2 resources is worth an action. So that means that our from our emergency cash, that our 3 resources have to be worth less than a card. Or our resources have to be worth less than a card. Yeah. And then there's also the caveat that things being conditional factors in the case of shortcut, and where you don't have to pay the resources, but they're just, you can't do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, and go into emergency cash as well as this example. So as you, when you first are playing the game, you'll see that the actions you can take, you can draw a card and gain a resource. So you can use an action to gain a card or a resource, but the value is not 1 action equals 1 card and 1 resource. Baseline is just not worth the time if you have a better way to do it. So looking at emergency cash again, 1 action gives you 3 resources at the cost of 1 card, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a lot higher than just the 1 action gives you 1 resource. Just looking at that purely as just printed value.
But not what you wrote down, because that's wrong.
Is it what I wrote down? Fix it.
You wrote down one action is equal to one card and 3 resources, but it's an action and a card
is equal to 3 resources. I made
Damn
this
it,
change
Justin.
right before we went going. Apologies, everyone. So 1 action and 1 card equals 3 resources. Move the equal sign over. Math is hard when you're a 31-year-old idiot. We'll just move on to the next bit.
31-year-old film graduate.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're a 31-year-old film graduate.
Yeah. So, going next, this is how much is an action versus card versus a resource worth? Again, cards can be committed, but resources can't. This just baseline makes cards a little bit more valuable than resources. So if we just go with this, 1 card equals half an action, and 1 resource equals a quarter of an action. Again, this changes when it comes to the situation. But let's just look at this again when we come up talking about our next card, which is Preposterous Sketches. So Travis, why don't you break this down with your math here, which I think I wrote down properly from your notes, but hopefully I didn't mess this up too.
Yeah, so this card really shows what... There aren't any cards that cost your experience that I don't think that just straight up give you more cards for playing them. There's always caveats to them, or a bonus. But this one costs you a card and an action to play, plus 2 resources, and it has the condition that there's a clue on your location. So we have our card, which is worth using action as our base unit of measurement. You have your card, which is worth half, which we derived from emergency cash, plus your 1 full action to play it, plus your 2 resources, which are worth approximately 0.25, again derived from the emergency cash stuff I talked about earlier. So 0.5 plus 1 plus 0.5 gives us 2, and then plus 1 condition gives us 3 cards.
So then this is why, just in generally, again, why using an action to gain a resource is a suboptimal use of time. There's better things you can be doing. Of course, Arkham Horror is a constantly shifting challenge, so this can all change depending on the situation, but it's still a very good way to look at each individual resource in the game. An action is worth more than a card is worth more than a resource. However, this can all be completely thrown away by what's happening on the table in front of you, and you need to adapt. Bryn gave a very good example earlier about how when a resource can be worth more than something else. So Bryn, why don't you bring that up again? Because I think that's a good example of that.
The scenarios where a resource is typically worth more than its base printed value is when you have an item in your hand that you really need to play. Perhaps you're playing a blue character and you have a 45 in your hand and no weapons in play, but you only have 3 resources. That 4th resource becomes worth a whole lot more than the 3 before it, because it enables you to play your weapon and then continue moving on with the game. This is equally true of most classes. There's always something that you could be playing. The 1 resource that allows you to play it, if you don't have enough resources to play it, is worth a whole lot more.
Yeah. In that case, drawing a card
is not going to help you play your flamethrower. It's not going to help you play your Noptic manuscripts. It's not going to help you get your Dark Horse going or whatever.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that if you need to play something and you're missing 1 resource, or it's quiet and you're missing 2 resources, you're going to hurt your game more by not playing those things out, right?
Yeah. Also, generally, spending dead actions gaining resources is not a terrible thing, because resources are much more flexible in the long term than the other actions you could take if you have nothing to do this turn.
Yeah.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. You can use them to pay. Your cards are good and all, but if you can't pay to play them, they don't do that much.
Yeah.
But again, that depends on how much economy you have in your deck and stuff, right? If you have 10 cards left and 2 of them are emergency cash and 1 of them's hot streak or whatever, maybe it's worth it to try and draw cards, because you get the cards you draw, but also you're likely to draw a higher value's worth of resource than you would just gaining 3 resources.
Yeah, and this is why the game is This is why Arkham Horror is like.
That's why the game's fun. It's not just math.
Fun because you have to make different decisions all the time depending on the situation. With this series and also just with this video particularly, we're not trying to say like this is always the way to do it, because as we just said, there's tons of times where you could have to do something completely different than you were expecting to, or wanting to, or needing to. However, just understanding value is just a good inherent card game skill. And just knowing that simple, just generally, an action is worth more than a card is worth more than a resource can get you a lot. Just in general, is this worth it on my turn? Playing a Panoptic Manuscripts is better than not, so I'll take a resource to play it, for example.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, even playing Panoptic Manuscripts, if it costs you 2 actions, that's still good.
Yeah. So now we're done the boring talking about the value of a card, but now we're going to just look at examples of cards that give you value in various ways. We're going to touch back on Emergency Cash, and one that Travis just mentioned of Hot Streak is cards that gain resources. So rather than taking an action to gain a resource, using cards to gain a resource is also nice. For example, Hot Streak for 3 resources, and a card gives you essentially 7 resources. You get 10, but it's essentially from 3 to 10, so it's 7.
Yeah, we are trading some extra resources, like additional resources to get this money, where like we have to have 3 resources before we're allowed to play it, unlike Emergency Cash, where we can play it for 0. But also we've traded some of our experience into it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So is that in the slides? Is talking about experience in the slides?
Yeah, it is.
It is. Okay, good.
Yeah. It's in the values stuff here. I got everything that I sent you the thing. I thought you read it. Anyway, let's move on to cards.
I was just double checking.
What did you say?
I was just double checking.
Cards that generate actions. So these are some cards that generate actions. Travis, you love Shortcut. Why is Shortcut so nice?
Well, actually, all these are basically the same card, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Where they give you a free move action, and there's lots of other cards that generate actions, especially in green, or that effectively generate you actions, which we'll touch on later, I think. But movement actions are generally the best, because getting a free action that you can do anything with is typically relegated to green, almost exclusively, I think. And they also tend to cost quite a bit. Whereas getting movement actions is, like, as you can tell from the cost of these cards, some of which may be a design mistake, but it's basically free. And you're going to do a lot of move actions. Like, there's always that opportunity cost of or restriction, where if you play a card, it's not, we don't have a picture of it, but like Get Over Here, where you want to be, it lets you move and then attack and engage an enemy. But if you don't want to attack an enemy, the card's useless. Whereas for these cards, like, when do you not want to move?
Yeah. Moving is pretty important in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they all have like sort of different, they all have different conditions on them as well, where like Shortcut, you can only play once. Safeguard, another investigator on your team or on your location has to be moving. And then Pathfinder, you have to not be engaged by an enemy. But like, they're really not hard to play around.
Yeah, those are easy hoops to jump through.
Yeah, especially Pathfinder.
There are also, so these are some examples of cards that get cards.
Yeah, these are a little bit more, a little less straightforward than a card like Preposterous Sketches that just straight draws you cards. But we felt like it was important to talk about them. And Bryn, you like all these cards, so why don't you talk about them?
Man. So with Practice Makes Perfect, we get to search through the top 9 cards of our deck for a practice skill. That might seem like a very narrow card, but it turns out that a lot of cards are practiced. And many of them are very good, such as ones we're going to touch on later in this video, Vicious Blow and Deduction. So you get to find one of those, commit it to the skill test you're currently performing, and then after the skill test ends, if it's successful, it adds it to your hand. So it replaces itself, but also provides the value of committing the skill. Difference is that you got to pay a little more for it. Guts, well, guts is guts. But any of these type of cards where you get to commit them for a boost to get you over whatever number it is you're trying to beat, and then they just replace themselves, they're effectively free. As opposed to normally committing a card costs you a card from your hand. This one doesn't unless you fail.
Yeah. Which you
It
never
also has the
aim to
benefit
fail.
of it also has the benefit of actually drawing, because you're drawing a card and it's not hard to find an opportunity to use guts. It makes you more likely to draw the cards that you actually want to see in your deck, your high experience ones. So it thins your deck as well.
And then
Sleight of hand
hand.
is, Sleight of hand's a little bit weird on this one. As printed, this card has gone through many changes, but as printed, we get to put an item asset from our hand into play, and at the end of the turn, if that asset is still in play, we put it back into our hand. So there's a lot of potential card advantage that you could get here, where maybe you sleight of hand in something with limited uses, like a 45, or that's probably the best example. But
a 45 or a bottle of liquor.
Yeah, like liquor or anything with a finite number of uses that you can ideally burn all in one turn.
Yeah.
So you can sleight of hand your 45 automatic into play. Sleight of hand is fast. It doesn't cost you an action. You burn all the uses, 3 uses off your 45. Then you put it back into your hand. It's like you've drawn a new 45.
Yeah.
But you still got to use that. Use it that turn.
Yeah, that's something all these cards have in common, is that they're flexible in what they can do, but also they let you just have your card back.
Yeah. Then, as Bryn mentioned, we got Vicious Blow and Deduction as cards that provide positive tempo. So as we said at the beginning, there is a tempo video where we discuss in detail, but Deduction is a great way of looking at it. You essentially get 2 actions out of Deduction if you're successful. You gain an additional clue out of 1 action. With Vicious Blow, you get an additional attack, so to speak, of damage without having to make an additional test. So that's why these cards are so good and why the value on them is high for providing positive tempo. And then we got, these are some fun ones. So, cards that provide value but require a condition. Travis?
Yeah, most of the cards in this game don't fit under the strict resource conversion that we were talking about in the previous slides. And you gotta kind of play around with them to make them work. We have a Astounding Revelation first off, which is an example of a card that is conditionally above curve, and then the rest of the time is below curve. Having a card commit for 1 book symbol is pretty trash, and that's all this does in your hand. But when you get it, when you're searching your deck, 2 free resources, doesn't cost an action, basically doesn't cost you a card because it's not coming from your hand, it's coming from your deck, or a secret on an asset you control.
I think Astounding Revelation is a great card for a player who's just starting out to understand what value is. Because when you find it through a search action, you're like, oh my god, this shocked rabbi is so happy for me. And then you draw it, and you're like, what are you doing here? This is the worst draw I've seen in my entire life. Travis is right. When you find it in your deck, it's incredible. When you draw it, you're like, great, I got a book symbol. Sorry to interrupt. You can go to Jewel now.
No problem. Jewel of Aureolus, whatever it's called. This one costs you 3 resources, an action, and a card to play. So it's as well as 3 resources, and it takes up your necklace slot. So it's quite a bit of commitment to it. But after one of the symbol tokens is revealed during a skill test at your location, so by any investigator, you can exhaust it to either draw a card or gain 2 resources. So this is an example of sort of an investment card where there's a big upfront cost to it, but you're going to get... It only takes 3 symbols to be revealed for you to be about even on it. And then anything after that is just free money and cards. Fourth, we have Lone Wolf. Again, small upfront cost where it costs you the card to play, the action to play it, 1 money. Just sits in play. And then when your turn begins, for no other investigators at your location, you gain 1 resource. So it already pays for itself resource-wise the first turn that you trigger it, and then it takes like 2, maybe 3 turns to pay for the action of the card after. But it requires you to be alone when you start your turn. So yeah, it can generate like theoretically infinite resources for you, but you have to work for it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of investment cards that feel better than landing a lone wolf on turn 1.
Yeah.
It pays for itself.
And then forcing your teammates to go first to get off your location every turn.
Yes, that is something you can do. You might not know. If you're looking at Lone Wolf and being like, oh, I want to play this, as long as you start your turn alone, so if you're another player start on their turn, if they go first, they can move out, and then your Lone Wolf will trigger.
Yeah, it's not start of the round, it's start of your turn.
Yeah. And then pickpocketing.
And the last card we've got here is pickpocketing. 2 money to play, card in the action to play it. And then as a reaction, after you evade an enemy, you exhaust pickpocket to draw a card. So you look at this, you're like, I'm a green, I got a big foot. This is basically worth an extra card every turn, which is a great return on your investment. But the tough part is you need to want to evade an enemy every turn. If you're going out of your way to evade an enemy to trigger your pickpocketing, it's probably not worth it, because like, why wouldn't you just not do the skill test and draw a card instead? And so this card is like especially good when you have a way to sort of abuse it, like Finn Edwards, who gets a free action to evade every turn. Mm-hmm. So you want to get the most of that action anyway. It's something that sort of thing we're going to talk about later on in the video. But you don't need to go out of your way to draw the card off of this, because you're already kind of doing it.
Yeah. It's also kind of one of those things that, like, pickpocketing, assuming you're, like, a green character with a high foot, which is most green characters, it's just really easy for you to be like, this is, like, just, for something I'm going to have to do in the game's going to now reward me for it, right? It's a way to look at that as well. It just now adds some value onto your evade actions, which is... Also,
which
really
is how
beneficial.
You should be looking at this card. It's not that you get to draw a card every turn if you evade an enemy. It's that whenever you evade an enemy, you get to draw a card.
Yeah, you get a little bonus. It's great.
Yeah, it also it gets a whole lot better when you have other cards that care about like you doing things. Like, for example, if one of your teammates has a Jewel of Aureolus and you have a pickpocketing, you can now reveal a token and possibly draw them a card as well, or get them resources as well. Or if you have 2 pickpocketings in play, you can draw 2 cards for evading an enemy, which becomes like quite solid value. You spent 1 action. You do have to run the test, but you get to draw 2 cards for it instead of the 1 that you normally do.
Yeah, like that's a situation where you might be thinking, like, even if I don't need to evade this enemy, if I don't have too much else going on in my turn, I might as well try this, give my Jewel teammate the bonus.
Cool. All right, let's go to our next slide, which are cards that provide XP. So XP is the one resource we haven't really touched on in the game, because you get the majority of your XP from just playing your encounter, defeating the bosses, investigating locations, and just all around having a good time. But there are a few cards that you spend some of your time now for more XP in the future. For example, there's Delve Too Deep, which makes each player draw the top card of the encounter deck, but then you just get 1 extra victory point. So the value there is that there's a little bit of punishment now, but you're going to get more powerful, exciting cards in your deck quicker and be able to use them earlier in the scenario because of that.
The other one we've got here is like God Sort Them Out, which is like play only during one of your turns in which you defeat enemies with a total of 6 or more health, and then you add it to the victory display and immediately end your turn. You get 1 extra experience at the end of it. Experience card-wise is pretty hard to come by, and this is like basically Delve Too Deep is like the creme de la creme of them. It's the good one. Let God Sort Them Out has its place, I think, but as a general rule, the hoops you have to jump through are like not worth the 1 extra experience.
Yeah,
they do make it a little tough.
One thing
something else to talk about. Sorry.
One thing of note, just for an example of what Travis is even saying, the difference of this, like, Let God Sort Them Out commits for a fist. So, like, worst case scenario, it's a fist. But it's still not good. Like, as convenient enough as Delve Too Deep, which only gives you experience. It's all the card does. It can't do anything else but that. So like Delve Too Deep is like the juicy one for getting this value through this. So if you're looking at that, it's a lot easier to do, and just a lot. Its sole purpose is to do.
Yeah, like Godsworth mode, you have to jump through all kinds of hoops to make it work. Whereas Delve Too Deep, you just play it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Delve Too Deep.
You may deal with it.
Yeah, Delve Too Deep requires you to like make a fairly large tempo sacrifice, but if you're ahead of the game, you can usually afford it.
Or if you're at like the very end down on the resign location, you like let your teammates resign. You're like, I'm just gonna draw 2 cards, and then we're all gonna get 2 extra experience.
That's the secret right there.
It's the dream.
Yeah.
Whereas like Godsworth requires you to manage your enemies so that you have 6 hit points worth of them on one space.
Yeah.
And you have to beat them all.
Well, I guess they don't have to be on one space. You can move in between, but
yeah,
you know.
And you have a sick co-pitch leave this or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still like a little tough.
I'm going to move on to the next one unless anyone has anything else to say.
I have one more thing for experience.
Perfect.
So experience, like the experience doesn't really come at the cost of cards or resources or actions like everything else kind of. It sort of comes at the cost of actions, but more in the case of tempo, where in a scenario you trade tempo because a lot of the enemies that have victory on them or the locations that have victory on them don't necessarily require you to do them to finish the scenario you're going, or they're more difficult to do. They're like bonus objectives. So basically you are trading your tempo in the scenario that you're doing now to get better cards that are more resource efficient, more valuable, and more tempo positive to make future scenarios easier. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a snowballing effect, kind of.
Yeah, and it's the question that you're going to find yourself asking, maybe not on your first playthrough, but when you get a bit more of the game under your belt, being like, do we have time to grab the clues off these locations? Do we have the time to defeat this enemy that's an optional thing? And that's where the value of XP comes in as well. Like versus...
Yeah, you might want to answer those ones for yourselves. Don't listen to us, because Brandon and I will die for those.
Yes, they definitely will. Next up, we got cards that cost XP now, but provide more XP later. Bryn, you love Adaptable. So what does Adaptable benefit in terms of value? Where does the value from that come from?
So for Unadaptable, obviously, like we don't put it in our deck. We can never draw it. It doesn't do things while we're playing the game. What it does is it allows us to trade 2 of our cards out, or up to 2 of our cards out in between scenarios for 2 different level 0 cards. So it gives us a lot of agility around the game where, like, maybe we started out playing a fighter, but it turns out that somebody else on our team does that too. And we kind of need to be doing something else right now. Mm-hmm. Instead of paying 1 experience per level 0 card that we want to change into our deck, we can pay 1 experience one time to change many level 0 cards into our deck.
Yeah. And then there's also Sharon's Oval, which will give you more experience. So you pay 1 experience, 2 experience up front because the card's exceptional. And then from each scenario on, you earn 2 additional experience. So the first time you use it, it neutralizes itself. The value is then 0. However, every scenario after that, it gives you positive 2 experience every time. With the little caveat that if you die, you are killed. So there's a little bit of risk reward.
Just don't die.
Yeah, just don't die. It's easy. There's a reason this card hasn't seen play at our table. It's because Bryn always dies, and he just knows that this would not be a good choice for him.
I
don't
play
like
green
characters.
Most frequently.
Bryn dies way plays them.
Yeah, like I do end up getting defeated a lot.
So now with all this, some examples of the cards and some discussion. So how do you apply this to the game? Well, you ensure your actions you are taking are worth their value. Looking back, just spending an action to gain a resource is a lower value play. Look at cards that generate resources instead. And of course, this applies to everything. Drawing a card is not as good as finding a card that draws more cards for you. Or like practice makes perfect, that gives you a skill test that you can succeed on, get a value from, and then draw that skill that you use into your hand. So just when you're building your deck or looking at your turn and being like, what do I want to do? Always ask yourself, how can I do this the best way? And then it'll truly help you like it'll just help you win more. Like, there's not much to say. It's just like, if you always find the most optimal path you can, or the most high value play to get the thing you want, you'll just do good. So we have some other examples of that as well. Oh, sorry.
As a general rule in Arkham Horror, like, you're not looking to find there's no like absolutely correct, infallible way to win every scenario. Sometimes you draw the off fail and you do bad. Like, you're just looking to do the best that you can to mitigate the most luck as possible, to swing things as far in your favor as you can.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a casino when you're counting cards playing blackjack or something like that. It's just you can do everything right, but still lose.
Yeah, but it's better to do everything right and still lose than do everything wrong and still lose. So your goal is to do everything right and still lose.
Yeah, if you do everything wrong, you probably can't win anymore.
Yeah.
But if you do everything right and still lose, like, well, you know, you had a pretty reasonable shot at winning. It just didn't play out this time.
Yes. So we have some examples of how to also further apply this to the game. So Ursula Downs, if you get something for free, how can you leverage that? So this is something that Bryn loves. I'll let him explain why it's good. I'll just quickly explain it. So after you move to a location, you get to take a free investigate round every turn with Ursula Downs. In the know, you can spend a secret to investigate any revealed location in play, as if you were at that location. So Bryn, why is that so nice?
Yeah, so not every location you move into is going to have clues on it, which means that investigating it is mostly pointless. However, within the know, if there are no locations in play with clues on them, you're probably winning very soon. So there should always be a revealed location in play that has clues on it that you can then use to move and take your investigate action and make it do something for you.
Yeah.
It also. Sorry. It also makes her blue symbol makes you move. This is not always a good thing, but within the know, you can always turn that move into like a free investigate if you haven't used that this turn yet.
Yeah.
It also helps with her weakness.
Yes.
Yeah. It does do that.
Another example is Patrice. She gets 5 free cards every turn, which is a lot of cards. Just getting 5 free cards is sweet. So how can you build the best plan around those cards? Patrice is kind of like... Go, Travis. You can go for it.
Yeah, so for this, like, you also have to factor in that you're discarding your hand at the end of your turn, too. You don't just get to draw 5 cards every turn with no repercussions. You also have, despite having a 42-card deck with her, you have very high consistency in how your deck will run. So, like, what can you do? You get 5 free cards every turn. You only have 3 actions. How are you going to play those 5 free cards or make them work for you with only 3 actions? Because you can't play 5. I mean, you could play fast cards that don't cost you an action. So if you draw, like, in theory, 3 normal cards and 2 fast cards, you can theoretically play them all. You can play a big pile of skills that don't cost you actions and that can benefit your teammates as well. Those don't cost you actions. Other options are cards that do things even if they've been discarded. There's a small cycle of red events. The good ones, Winging It, which allow you to play them from your discard. Or a card like Glimmer of Hope that lets you pick up the discard copies, or Moonstone, which you can only play when it's discarded.
Yeah.
And you want to avoid playing, because you have to throw away your cards, as a general rule, you want to avoid playing situational cards. Cards like Warder Protection are like, they're still good, but they're not as good as they normally are, because you just have to throw them at whatever the deck gives you.
Yeah.
Because if you don't play it, then you're just going to discard it. What's the point?
Yeah.
Right?
However, reactive cards such as Lucky are still fairly good, because if the game never gives you an opportunity to play one of your reactive defensive cards that apply during your own turn, then nothing bad happened to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't fail tap, you're lucky. Then
right, like
fine.
You're just you're a different kind of lucky.
Yeah. In that same vein, cards like or situational cards like Oops or even Look What I Found are a little bit worse than Patrice because if you have Look What I Found in your hand, it only commits for book symbols. It only does it. You can only play it if you're investigating. So you draw it and you're like, well, I guess I have to investigate this turn. It isn't necessarily a bad thing. You want to investigate to win the game, but sometimes it's just a dead draw. You're like, why aren't you impromptu weapon? I need to fight this monster I'm engaged with. I can't investigate. These book symbols don't help me run away.
Yeah. So that's like one of those things that when you're, especially with someone like Patrice, when you're building your deck, you got to be planning for the idea that each turn you're going to get 5 new free cards. And then how do you build the best plan around them, right? So like with Patrice...
How do you make them count every time?
This has been your mini Patrice primer, your bonus.
Like with Patrice, someone like her, you don't want to spend a time drawing cards because, for example, you get 5 free cards and you don't need more of them because they're going to go away. The last thing I want to quickly touch on for value is turn a downside into a positive. So Mr. Rook finds weaknesses when he sorts through his deck, through your deck. Mr. Rook is also an incredibly powerful card, and his downside is not that much of a downside if, for example, this fun little thing that Travis did in one of our videos with the Hungering Blade, find the Bloodlust to put them on your blade quicker, or alternatively just looking through your deck to get your weakness out so you don't draw it again is also like a good thing. Like having the control of when you draw your weakness. Like say for example your weakness was discard all your resources. You just played 3 resources for Mr. Rook. You have none left. Let's go digging for it while also grabbing another card. So search 9, find your weakness, and then like you're golden for like until you reshuffle your deck, right? So that's also kind of like a big value thing as well, turning a negative into a positive.
Yeah, looking to abuse like things the game tries to turn against you and looking to abuse them for yourself.
Yeah.
Is another example of this one is like drawing thin, where you have to make a test harder. In exchange, you get to draw a card or gain a resource, and you can just. The downside of that is you have to make the test harder, but there's plenty of cards like or investigators. Like if you're playing Silas Marsh, and you commit your skills to it, and if you like don't need them, you can pick them back up, and then you didn't really commit anything. You get free resources or take free actions with track shoes. Then it doesn't matter if you fail that test because you didn't want to use it anyway.
Yeah.
Or just playing Calvin, having like sky high skill values. You're like the game's. You're investigating a 3-shot location. You're like, well, yeah, I'll use my 2 things, make up to 7. And you're like, who cares? I have base, 6 book or whatever, and I can commit a card to make it 8 or 9.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, or for example, like Mark Harrigan, who whenever he or one of his cards take damage, you get to draw a card. There are plenty of blue cards that require you to take damage or have them take damage in order to do something.
Yeah.
Every video, baby.
Yeah. So like. Maybe you've got a beat cop and you have him take a damage to do a damage to something, but you also get to draw a card now. So that cost basically doesn't exist.
Yeah. So as you can see from us still just pulling examples out, there are a ton of ways to gain value in this game. And because there's so many cards, it's very daunting. So the whole point of this series is to help you kind of just understand these core concepts, looking at every situation and being like, how can I get the best out of this? So hopefully this understanding value video helped you. We have a ton more in this series coming over time. We're going to be talking about engines. We're going to be talking like card engines. Like Bryn loves building his big display of assets. We're going to be talking about that as well.
Big rig, baby.
We have a bunch of stuff coming. If there's any concepts in the game that you are curious about or want some thoughts from 3 people who talk about Arkham Horror the card game a bit too much every week, just let us know in the comments. We'll be happy to yammer on more for you as well. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. And as always, GG's.